I didn't realize that it's already 4 days since we assembled in this venue for the discussion that we have. But when I was trying to look at what I have to say for my former boss here, Dr. Maliki Osman, I had to look at all my little notes. Yeah, and I realized that many of you have sat through quite a few presentations by different experts. So hopefully this morning, all of you who have not asked any question or make any comments can now arrow all your questions to this man on my right. Yeah. So if he is saying something that you don't want to hear or you don't understand, please raise your hand and ask more answers from him. But I'm supposed to introduce him. The only thing I can say positively about him is that he used to be my former boss at the Foreign Ministry. He was in politics, and now I don't know why he, after retirement, still want to work in the university. Yeah, if I were him, after retirement, I would just disappear somewhere on beaches or some fancy places. No one can find him. But anyway, he is still with our school through the NTU President's Office. And that means that we have to get him to do some work from time to time. Yeah. But I think you will enjoy listening to him because I personally enjoy listening to his presentation from time to time in those times at the Foreign Ministry. And when we saw him on TV and when he was traveling with the Prime Minister. So all I can say now is that he is going to present a topic on what he has heard so far, the last 4 or 5 days. But the most important thing is that I suppose he will also refer to the importance of small state like Singapore, how we manage to organize our work and how we look at the world from what the work that we have put together. So please ask him anything you want at the end of his presentation. By doing so, you make my job easier. So I just have to thank him and thank all of you for this morning's session. Yeah. Okay. Enough of introduction, Dr. Maliki. Now I present you Dr. Maliki Osman. Ladies and gentlemen, over to you, sir.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Ong. Thank you so much. Distinguished colleagues, ladies and gentlemen. You know, when I was in office, life was a lot easier because you got staffers to help you with everything that you want to do, or you have to do. But this time round, I can tell you I don't have slides because I don't have staffers to help me. And I don't have staffers to help me draft my speech either. So I'm going to share with you what I thought was critical given the last few days' line of discussion. So let me just start off by saying a couple of things. First, you know, I have been to APPSMO a couple of times, previously addressing the group as the keynote speaker. But this time, really, it's an honor and privilege to address you for this closing session of this conference. Throughout the week, we have heard respected panel speakers distill very key challenges facing us, how multilateralism is under strain in a world that is in flux, challenges to our security, and what we all can do to find a new global equilibrium, including the role of middle powers and regional groupings like ASEAN. We've spoken a lot over the last couple of days, including not just from the security angle, but also from the economic security perspective. We have heard how the rules and institutions that have underpinned global order for decades, institutions that facilitated trade, cooperation, and collective security, are being challenged. We also see before our eyes how global power dynamics are shifting, and we all know, heard so much about it, how alliances are tested, and new forms of threats are emerging. For small states, these are not abstract conceptions, or these are not abstract ideas, but they are really existential. The stakes are exceptionally high, given limited military capabilities of many small states, the deep economic dependencies around the world with different partners in the world, and the narrow geopolitical margins that they have. So, as small states, relying on self help is not an option. So, our security is intertwined with the effectiveness of multilateral institutions and adherence to international norms and the willingness of larger powers to respect the rules based order. So, today I will explore the current state of multilateralism, the security challenges facing small states, and the strategies that we can adopt to navigate this very uncertain environment. Along the way, I will draw on some of these examples from Singapore, a bit from ASEAN, other small states that demonstrate resilience and ingenuity in leveraging multilateralism, albeit the current threats on multilateralism itself. First, very quickly, let me touch on the changing landscape of multilateralism, which we all have heard over the last couple of days. We all want to believe that multilateralism will make the world stronger, safer, and fairer as nations cooperate through common institutions and shared values. It is the idea that disputes should be settled not by force, but by law, and that might should not make right, but rather that right should restrain might. We've heard so much diplomats, ministers speak about how important this concept is. Multilateralism has been the backbone of global peace and progress for many years and the glue that binds international order. But for small states, this rules-based international order was and remains our greatest equalizer. It gives weight to the principles of sovereignty, independence, and equality, regardless of size and power. As we've heard repeatedly this week and in many other forums, multilateralism is under stress, and small state feel the tremors first. So let me quickly highlight three factors that have been mentioned by many speakers in this conference related to the threats to multilateralism. First, we all know the great power rivalry, the shifting power balance. The balance of power that once favored the US is slowly eroding. In the past decade, we see the rise of China and the resurgence of Russia reshaping the global security landscape. As competition intensifies among US, China, and Russia, the world faces a security environment that is more contested, less predictable, and increasingly fragmented. Multilateral institutions, once primarily forums for cooperation, are increasingly becoming arenas of competition. Just take the UN Security Council as an example. While designed to maintain international peace, it has become a stage where interests of permanent members often override the collective will. We see resolutions on Syria and Ukraine as example of how veto power can prevent decisive action. For small states, this rivalry means their security depends not only on international law, but also on their ability to navigate the strategic interests of larger powers. Singapore, for instance, maintains a strong bilateral ties between both the US and China, while actively participating in ASEAN forums to ensure regional stability. Next, about norms and the erosion of norms. Norms such as territorial integrity, maritime freedom, and the sanctity of borders are also increasingly challenged. For example, Russia's invasion of Ukraine in 2022 represents the starkest violation of the UN Charter's prohibition on the use of force. It shattered Europe's post-war peace and demonstrated how a permanent member of the UN Security Council could defy the very rules that it helped to establish. Despite global condemnation, Russia continues the aggression, exposing the limitations of international law when enforcement depends on political will. The Security Council, paralyzed by Russia's veto, has been unable to act decisively, a vivid example of how power politics override legal principles. China's action in the South China Sea also illustrates the erosion of international norms. In 2016, as we all are familiar, the Permanent Court of Arbitration in The Hague ruled that China's expansive 9-line claims had no legal basis under the UN Convention on the Law of the Seas. Yet, Beijing rejected the ruling outright and continued to build artificial lands and militarize the area. The inability of the international community to enforce the ruling weakens respect for maritime law and sets a troubling precedent that powerful states can defy legal verdicts with impunity. Small states like the Philippines, Vietnam have relied on ASEAN and international arbitration to assert their rights. There are limits to all this. The action demonstrates that small states must combine law and diplomacy and alliance to counter unilateralism. Last point on this is the fragmentation of global governance. We are seeing a fragmentation of multilateral governance with countries pursuing unilateral trade policies or selective engagement. Example would be the US's withdrawal of the Trans-Pacific Partnership, then was TPP, and inconsistent with participation in climate agreements. We are also seeing countries increasingly forming coalitions of the willing on trade, technology, or climate, such as the Quad, AUKUS, and Indo-Pacific Economic Framework, instead of working through universal platforms like UN or WTO. But as we have heard, some speakers at this conference have argued that these minilaterals are in response to weakening multilateral and increasing unilateralism. Some states face uncertainty when global institutions that traditionally provided stability no longer function predictably and will have to find ways to respond. So, for example, Singapore has invested heavily in bilateral and regional trade agreements such as the CPTPP to hedge against unpredictability in global trade governance. So, with all these uncertainties, what are the security challenges for small states? So let me now turn to the implications on these security challenges. This uncertain global environment arising from the changing landscape of multilateralism renders some small states facing multinational vulnerabilities and security challenges. First, military vulnerability. Small states cannot sustain a large military capable of deterring aggression alone. Singapore, for example, with a population of just under 6 million, has limited manpower and relies heavily on technology and technological sophistication, conscription, and regional alliances. You have heard the presentation on Singapore's defense policy at day one of this conference, so I won't elaborate on that. But its investments in advanced air defense systems, its joint exercise program in Australia, naval cooperation with the US ensures that it can deter threats through capability and credible alliances rather than just sheer numbers. Its active role in multinational military exercises, especially under the frameworks like ADM Plus, is a strong example of how small states can enhance security through multilateral cooperation, even in a fragmented global environment. Second, small states are vulnerable to economic coercion. For instance, we remember in 2017 when Qatar faced a regional blockade that threatened its supply chains and economic stability. It responded through swift diplomatic engagement, diversification of imports, and alliances, demonstrating the importance of resilience and adaptability. Singapore mitigates such risks through diversification of trade, including free trade agreements with over 30 countries and strategic investments in global supply chains. So essentially, economic security is inseparable from national security for small states. Third challenge. Small states risk being marginalized in global forums dominated by larger powers. However, strategic coalition building can amplify their voice. So the Forum of Small States, for example, FOSS, which was established by Singapore in 1992, has been an effective platform for small states to amplify their voices in international diplomacy. As an illustration, during the negotiations leading to the UN 2030 Agenda on the Sustainable Development Goals, FOSS members worked collectively to ensure that the priorities of small and vulnerable states such as poverty eradication, climate resilience, and capacity building were included. But security for small states extends beyond the traditional domain of military and economy. Today's threats are indeed multinational. spanning cyberspace, the environment, internal security, and public health, each capable of undermining sovereignty and stability as profoundly as armed conflict. So let me first talk about cybersecurity threats. The digital domain has become both a critical enabler and a potential Achilles heel for small states. The 2007 cyber attack on Estonia, for example, crippled government, banking, and media networks and were a turning point in global cybersecurity awareness. Rather than retreating, Estonia responded by investing heavily in cyber defense and digital governance, becoming a world leader in cybersecurity innovation. Established NATO's Cooperative Cyber Defense Center of Excellence in Tallinn and promoted international norms for responsible state behavior in cyberspace. Estonia's example or experience demonstrates how a small state, through foresight and collaboration, can turn vulnerability into strength, leveraging technological proficiency as a form of strategic deterrence. For many small states, including Singapore, cybersecurity is now framed as a pillar of national resilience. These countries have built whole-of-nation cybersecurity strategies that integrate government, industry, and academia, recognizing that digital interdependence requires collective protection. Next, climate security. Climate change represents an existential and immediate threat, particularly for small island and low-lying coastal areas. The Maldives, Kiribati, Tuvalu, I've been to some of the Pacific islands, they all face the prospect of physical disappearance due to rising sea levels. For them, climate change is not just an environmental issue, it is a matter of survival, sovereignty, and human security. These nations have taken leadership roles in international climate diplomacy, amplifying their voices through coalitions such as Alliance of Small Island States, or AOCs. Their engagement in Paris Climate Accord and advocacy for international climate financing have framed climate vulnerability into a form of diplomatic leverage, compelling the global community to treat environmental degradation as a collective security challenge. Singapore, too, has recognized climate resilience as part of national security. Through long-term investments in coastal defenses, water security, and green innovation, Singapore demonstrates how forward-looking adaptation policies can mitigate climate risks and preserve strategic autonomy. Third, beyond military and economy, is internal security, social cohesion, and disinformation. Internally, Singapore's greatest strength is its social cohesion. This now faces new pressures from digital information environment. Disinformation campaigns, online extremism, and the foreign interference exploit global connectivity and the absence of effective international digital norms. Singapore has been proactive in legislating against such threats. The Protection of from Online Falsehood and Manipulation Act, for example, POFMA, and the Foreign Interference Countermeasures Act, FICA, provide mechanisms to counter harmful online content and external manipulation. Beyond law enforcement, Singapore invests in social resilience through community initiatives which promotes vigilance and unity against terror threats. These measures reflect a broader recognition that societal trust is a form of national defense. In a fragmented global order, where information warfare has blurred the line between peace and conflict, maintaining domestic unity is essential to security. Health security. The COVID-19 pandemic starkly revealed how non-traditional threats can destabilize even the most secure nations. Small states dependent on global supply chains and international mobility found themselves especially vulnerable to disruptions in health systems and economic activity. Singapore's response provides a notable example of strategic preparedness and multilateral engagement. Decades of investment in public health infrastructure, technology enabled contact tracing and regional coordination through the ASEAN mechanisms. And this allowed for effective containment and recovery during COVID-19. Moreover, Singapore's leadership in vaccine diplomacy, supporting regional distribution and capacity building, reinforced its role as a responsible and trusted partner in global health security. The pandemic underscored that security today must include the protection of human lives, livelihoods, not just the protection of borders. Small states that integrate health resilience into national security planning will be better positioned to navigate future crises, whether biological, economic, or environment. So, as we speak of the changing landscape of multilateralism and the consequent multiple security challenges, I would like to highlight three important factors for small states as they navigate the uncertainty effectively and make their mark in maintaining global order. These three include leadership, diplomacy, and trust. So much has been talked about the world order and changing world order then and now. And this depends on the kinds of leaders that helm their respective countries, big or small. For example, ASEAN's formation is a result of visionary leaders who decided to put their personal differences aside and prioritize regional peace, security, and stability. It is even more critical for small states to ensure that leaders possess the necessary traits that will help navigate a complex geopolitics and fragmented world. What kind of leadership traits? First, leaders who are strategic and principled. Given increasing power politics and when norms are being contested, small states will need leaders who are anchored in principles while having a pragmatic outlook and strategy. They must stand firm on the core values that safeguard their survival, the sovereignty, international law, and the rules-based order, while being flexible enough to navigate shifting alliances and new geopolitical realities. Specifically, they must uphold the UN Charter and the integrity of international law, even when major powers do not. At the same time, speaking out consistently for multilateral solutions over unilateral actions. They should not waver in the face of pressures from larger powers, instead rejecting credibility and trustworthiness, which are the true currencies of influence for small states. Singapore's consistent advocacy for international law in both regional and global forums, from the South China Sea disputes to the UN reforms, illustrate this form of principled, steady state leadership. Next, I think leaders who are agile and adaptable. Small states cannot afford to be rigid. Leaders must read global shifts early, pivot quickly, and seize opportunity amidst uncertainty. Essentially, they have to demonstrate adaptability while being grounded in foresight. They need to be agile. For example, during the COVID-19 pandemic, Singapore's agile leadership and diplomacy helped sustain supply chain links, vaccine access, and economic cooperation, despite border closures, reinforcing its reputation as a trusted and capable partner. In fact, our leaders were quick enough to decide and place their orders in most of the vaccine suppliers without clarity at that time, which ones will be approved for you. So by the time we really needed the vaccines, we were able to get the supplies needed. I think leaders that we need also are leaders who are ready to collaborate and build coalition. In a fragmented world, small states gain louder voice through coalition building. In this regard, leadership means connecting with the like-minded, creating networks that amplify influence beyond one's borders. This is where platforms like FORCE and ASEAN exemplify how small states can lead collectively rather than individually. Through such coalitions, small states can shape global agendas, as seen in the 2030 Sustainable Development Goals discussion. They can champion shared causes like climate security and digital inclusion and demonstrate that leadership can come from coordination and not cohesion. Singapore's creation of FORCE and its stewardship within ASEAN show how even small states can act as conveners of consensus, bridging divides and giving structure to cooperation. I also think that leaders that we need are leaders who are forward-looking and who are invested in building resilience. Small states must be led by future-oriented leaders who prepare their nations for long-term challenges, technological disruptions, climate change, demographic shifts, and new security threats. This demands leadership that is invested in national resilience, not just political survival. Specifically, small states need future-ready leadership that will invest in education, innovation, and social cohesion to ensure internal security and stability. It must also diversify strategic and economic partnerships to avoid overdependence on a few. These leaders must also embed resilience into diplomacy, defense, and domestic governance alike. Leaders must also be ready to inspire the citizens to be ready to reinvent themselves and be relevant to others and not to stagnate. Resilience and relevance, these are actually twin anchors of effective small state leadership. I've spoken about leadership to further strengthen their strategic resilience and international relevance. Leadership must be accompanied by diplomacy. Diplomacy is not merely useful for small states, it is existential. First, let me talk about diplomacy as the first line of defense. We must acknowledge that small states lack the hard power to protect their interests through coercion or deterrence. Thus, their survival depends on building relationships, managing risks, and avoiding isolation, all through diplomatic means. To small states, diplomacy is a shield by reinforcing international sovereignty and the principle of non-interference. Diplomacy is also a bridge connecting them to the wider coalition, regional mechanisms, and global networks that amplify their voice. Singapore's approach exemplifies this. So even amid tensions between major powers, it has maintained constructive relations with both US and China through steady, principled diplomacy focused on consistency, trust, and respect for rules-based order, ensuring that it is a reliable and dependable partner, articulating clearly its own interests above all. Diplomacy also allows states to advocate for adherence to international law. It is a tool to uphold multilateralism, support reform of multilateral institutions to ensure fair representation, and participate actively in global governance, even in non-traditional domains such as cyber, health, and climate security I mentioned earlier. For example, through force, small states have used diplomacy to defend the UN system and promote collective problem solving. Such initiatives remind the world that multilateralism remains relevant only if all states, large and small, have a stake in it. Effective diplomacy enables small states to punch above their weight, as we see diplomacy as a force multiplier. This has often been described as of Singapore, punching above our weight. Of course, we try not to acknowledge it. Through careful negotiation and coalition building, small states can influence agendas far beyond their size. For example, we see Qatar facilitating effectively in regional negotiations, elevating its international standing. Singapore's diplomacy through ASEAN and global partnerships has allowed it to shape trade, security, and governance norms. In each case, diplomacy functions as a force multiplier, turning limited material power into disproportionate strategic influence. Diplomacy can also be used for risk management and diversification. In a fragmented world order, small states must avoid overdependence on any single partner or bloc. Diplomacy enables them to diversify relations and balance ties across competing powers, preserving their autonomy. For instance, ASEAN's approach to major powers maintaining open channels with both US and China is a form of collective diplomatic balancing. Singapore's network of free trade agreements and strategic partnerships illustrates how diplomacy builds economic and political resilience against global uncertainty. This diplomatic diversification gives small states room to maneuver, ensure that they are not caught in the crossfire of great power competition. Diplomacy also enables small states to project credibility, consistency, and competence, shaping how others perceive and engage with them. That's what we call soft power and credibility. Furthermore, through active participation in international institutions, peacekeeping, and development assistance, small states can demonstrate that they are responsible stakeholders in global affairs. So, for example, Singapore contributes to UN peacekeeping missions and capacity building for our fellow small states through the Singapore Cooperation Program. Apart from FORCE, Singapore also initiated, as an example, the Forum of East Asia and Latin America, or FELAC, to expand our reach and collaboration with emerging economies. This builds goodwill and reinforces its reputation as a constructive, reliable, and principled actor. Such diplomatic reputation is a form of strategic capital. It attracts partners, enhances trust, and deters coercion. Even as multilateral structures weaken, diplomacy gives small states the opportunity to lead through ideas where they can set norms in the international order. Small states can do so through proposing frameworks, mediating differences, and shaping norms that can still influence outcomes. So, for example, Singapore has shaped debates on free trade, digital economy, governance, and maritime security in ASEAN and beyond. This kind of norm and agenda-setting diplomacy allows small states to lead through intellect and credibility rather than power. Finally, diplomacy allows small states to act together, transforming vulnerability into a voice to be reckoned with, i.e., diplomacy as collective resilience. In times of when global institutions are under stress, coalitions of small states, whether through force, alliances of island states, AOSIS, or ASEAN, can uphold principles of cooperation and dialogue. By maintaining solidarity, small states preserve the essence of multilateralism, ensuring that the world remains governed by norms, not by the whims of power. For small states, diplomacy is their means of safeguarding sovereignty, expanding influence, and ensuring survival amidst uncertainty. It is through diplomacy, quiet, consistent, and credible, that small states ensure they are not merely subjects of global change, but participate in shaping it. Let me now touch on another factor critical to leaders of small states, navigating the challenging global environment. That is trust. In the fluid and unpredictable environment in geopolitics, the personal trust that leaders cultivate with one another often substitute for the lack of institutional stability in global governance. For small states whose influence depends on material power and more on perception, interpersonal trust among leaders serves as both a diplomatic lubricant and a strategic asset. When leaders trust one another, diplomatic communication becomes more candid and less scripted, allowing early warning of tensions and informal problem solving. At the same time, policy coordination can be accelerated as is based on deep mutual trust that leaders can bypass bureaucratic inertia. Conversely, with trust, we see decreased misperceptions, reducing the likelihood of unintended escalation in crisis. So for small states, such relationships can amplify voice and access, enabling their leaders to shape conversations at the highest levels of decision making. To build trust, leaders need to strengthen a few key foundations in my mind. First, credibility through consistency. Leaders can earn trust by demonstrating predictability in their policies and engagements. When a leader's commitments, bilateral, regional, or multilateral, are seen as reliable, others are more likely to invest in long-term cooperation. So Singapore's consistent foreign policy across political leadership transitions exemplifies how institutionalized credibility supports this leader-level trust. Second, trust deepens when leaders show genuine understanding of each other's domestic constraints and historical sensitivities. So, for example, the personal rapport between Singapore's Prime Minister and his ASEAN counterparts has often enabled quiet consensus on difficult issues such as the South China Sea, even when officials' communiques appeared restrained. Third, small states gain trust not by asserting dominance, but by demonstrating respect for the sovereignty and dignity of others. Leaders who listen, avoid lecturing, and emphasizing partnership over hierarchy often gain disproportionate influence. Singapore has always expressed our interest in the success of our neighbors and partners. Their success is good for us. So let me now suggest a few mechanisms for building trust and leaders can adopt. First, regular structured yet informal dialogues through retreats, summits, and leader-level forums create space for honest exchanges. ASEAN's leaders retreat format as a group and bilaterally is a prime example. Such settings allow small state leaders to build rapport with major powers beyond formal speeches or prepared notes. Second, shared management of crises like pandemic, humanitarian disasters provide opportunities for leaders to demonstrate reliability and dependability. Singapore's assistance to regional partners during COVID-19 through vaccine support and medical logistics reinforced trust that transcended transactional ties. The Singapore Armed Forces, Singapore Civil Defence Force have been deployed in many humanitarian relief and rescue operations in various ASEAN and other countries during major tragedies. Third way is trust often grows through symbolic acts, hosting summits, visiting during national emergencies, or publicly supporting mutual causes. So, for example, Singapore's facilitation of the 2018 Trump-Kim summit showed how small states can leverage hospitality and neutrality to gain trust of conflicting leaders. Fourth, trust amongst leaders is sustained when diplomatic institutions preserve relationships across administrations. Singapore's professional diplomatic corps ensures that personal rapport built at the top is reinforced through institutional networks, turning individual trust to structural trust. But despite the potential, sustaining trust amongst leaders face multiple challenges, not easy to establish and maintain trust. Frequent leadership changes in larger states can actually disrupt that continuity in leadership turnover and political cycles. Personal rapport built over years may dissolve overnight, requiring small states to rebuild trust repeatedly. It's my own personal experience when I was in the foreign ministry. Every time there is a change in government, we have to start all over again, building that trust. For instance, transition in the US administration often bring new priorities and styles, forcing small states to re-establish understanding. There's also the challenge of structural asymmetry. Small state leaders often engage with counterparts from major powers who wield disproportionate influence. Such asymmetry can constrain honest dialogue and create perceptions of dependency, limiting trust depth. Leaders are also ultimately accountable to their domestic audiences, so there will be domestic political pressures. Even well-intentioned personal relations can be constrained by nationalist sentiment or domestic media narratives that politicize foreign engagement. In an era of disinformation, private communication can also be leaked or distorted, so the next challenge is really information manipulation and strategic distrust. We have seen leaders stripped of their position recently, as in the case of Thailand, when we heard about the issue of the leaked conversation. The fear of being misinterpreted discourages candor, making trust building slower and more guarded. Differences in governance systems, values, or political cultures can also inhibit emotional trust. For example, leaders of liberal democracies and authoritarian systems often interpret transparency, loyalty, and accountability differently, complicating relational trust. So I've spoken about leadership, I've spoken about diplomacy and trust. So where do we go from here for small states as we manage this? I think small states have a role to play in reinventing multilateralism. So as we look ahead, one fact is clear, that the world may be in flux, but multilateralism is not dead. It has been the conclusion from many of the speakers in this conference also. It is evolving. In addition to leadership, trust, and diplomacy to ensure security and survival, small states cannot afford to reject multilateral frameworks simply because they are under stress, as doing so would expose them to isolation, vulnerability, and strategic uncertainty. Instead, the future demands reinvention of multilateralism, adapting multilateralism to the realities of a multipolar, technologically advanced, and increasingly fragmented world. What can we do? First, establishing flexible and issue-based alliances. Traditional multilateral alliances, often rigid and slow-moving, may not fully address emerging threats such as cyber attacks, climate change, and health crises. So small states must therefore pursue flexible issue-based coalitions. This was the point made by Pak Marty on the first day. For example, the Pacific Island nations, though small in size and population, have banded together to amplify their voice on climate change through forums like the Oasis. By focusing on shared existential threats rather than general global politics, they have successfully influenced UN climate negotiations and climate financing. Similarly, Singapore and other ASEAN members have engaged in digital economy partnerships and regional cybersecurity exercises that are more flexible than formal defense treaties, but provide practical security and resilience. Next, for multilateralism to remain relevant, small states must ensure that global governments reflect their interests, not just those of powerful nations. This requires both advocacy and active participation in reform processes. For example, Singapore has advocated for enhanced ASEAN centrality in Asia-Pacific security architecture, ensuring that small and medium-sized states have a voice in engagements with larger powers like the US, China, and India. Beyond ASEAN, initiatives such as FORCE at the UN give small countries a platform to address issues ranging from areas I mentioned earlier, security, cybersecurity, and all. Thirdly, what can we do? Is leverage technology and innovation. The future of multilateralism is increasingly intertwined with technology. Small states can use innovation as strategic force multiplier. Cybersecurity alliances, joint research initiatives, and digital trade agreements are examples where small states can shape global norms and protect their own national interests. Reinvention also requires anticipating non-traditional threats, as mentioned earlier, climate-induced disasters, pandemics, economic coercion, and transnational crime, and embedding resilience into these multilateral strategies. Singapore, for instance, uses multilateral cooperation in public health through ASEAN and global institutions to safeguard its population and economy. During the COVID-19 pandemic, coordinated supply chains and information sharing agreements mitigated the impact of the pandemic on this small state. So allow me to just conclude by saying that the world is, yes, indeed in flux. Uncertainty is the only certainty, but small states are not powerless. Through leadership, diplomacy, and deepening trust amongst leaders, small states can build effective coalition, take advantage of technological innovation, and engage with principles that uphold the rules-based order to protect their security and assert influence. Singapore's experience demonstrates that size does not determine impact. By leveraging networks, strengthening norms, and exercising agile leadership, small states can navigate turbulence, turning vulnerabilities into strengths. So multilateralism may be tested, but it remains indispensable. The challenge is not to abandon it, but to adapt it through leadership, innovation, and collaboration, through diplomacy and trust, so that the global community, big and small alike, can strive together. I look forward to our discussion. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Dr. Maliki. Well, ladies and gentlemen, he did his part. Now, you have to do your part. You agree or disagree, strongly support, disagree with him, whatever. Or neither of all this, just say that you have something else to say. Yeah. Questions and comments? Anyone? Ladies first, yeah. Gabriel, right? From Australia, yeah. Gabriela, all right.
Thanks. Thanks, Ambassador Ong, and thank you so much for the presentation this morning. I found it very interesting and practical and applicable. So I was particularly interested in the case study that you provided on COVID and the response by Singapore. On the line about multilateral activities working to address challenges rather than taking unilateral stances, what can ASEAN member states do in response to the border tensions between Thailand and Cambodia? And what could dialogue partners of ASEAN do along those lines? Thank you.
We take one more question. Comments? One more question, comments? We go. Yeah, Joel, sorry. Dr. Joel.
Thank you, Dr. Maliki. You've really painted a very expansive picture of the role of small states, and it's a very enormous task, actually. So I'm sure you are familiar. A lot of small states look to Singapore and they say, well, we can't do what you can do because we have capacity constraints, we're limited in size and population. So what are ways that small states can elevate or increase their capacity to meet this challenge? And what are perhaps some of the ways Singapore has done that or innovated to meet these challenges?
Okay, boss, over to you.
Thank you. Gabriel, the question on what can ASEAN member states and dialogue partners do to manage the interborder conflicts. I think, particularly in the case of Thailand and Cambodia, I think day one when Pak Mati articulated these issues also. Border conflicts is not new to ASEAN nor anywhere in the world. And for ASEAN, it's the history of colonization, and during that time where the colonial powers just decide to divide the different countries by just drawing lines that until today has never been resolved. So it's a long-standing issue. And I think it will continue to be long-standing. What is helpful in ASEAN is that from the very beginning, the formation has been pillared on this notion of regional stability and security. And therefore, we've worked together to build trust amongst leaders, and successive generations of leaders must continue to build that trust. And so you see the ups and downs of such crises or such disputes taking center stage. You see at times when it stays down and things appear to be calm, and at times it goes up, right? And how do we manage? We manage through sometimes when it escalates, in a case where Pak Mati was actually involved at that time to travel between the two countries to find some resolution, it helped. At times we meet at the leaders level and say, let's try to manage this tension. And at the end of the day, it's always a reminder that if peace, security, and stability is threatened in ASEAN, we all stand to lose. And that's really where I wanted to highlight the importance of the three factors: leadership, diplomacy, and trust within ASEAN itself. Successive generations of leaders come in and out of the system, and different countries. And that's the unique thing about ASEAN and the challenge in itself. 10 countries with diverse backgrounds, diverse history, diverse political system, different pace of economic development, yet upholding the very principle of why it was formed in the first place: stability, security, and the importance of that stability we have. And so we need to continue to build on that, and we should continue to engage leaders. In the recent PAT, for example, Malaysia, Prime Minister Anwar Ibrahim, as the chairman of ASEAN, came in to manage, to reduce tensions. And we also believe that we should leave it to the respective parties to find resolutions, however it may be. I mean, border disputes, some have been resolved, some still outstanding. Singapore, Malaysia, Pada Branca, we went to the ICJ, the rules route to resolve it, successfully resolved. Malaysia, Indonesia, the islands. So it will always be there. Dialogue partners, I think it's important for them to appreciate that unique dynamic of ASEAN. Not many will understand that, because this is the way, this is the ASEAN way, and with Asian, I think, very subtle, very, it's more relationship building and based on relationship rather than, let's just get this done. Why is it difficult for you to do it, right? So dialogue partners would have to appreciate the history, culture. And that's one of the things I mentioned about building trust earlier. leaders need to appreciate each other's background, trust, values, to be able to build that trust. Because if you look at it and you want to build relationship, but each look at your own lenses, it's going to be very difficult because you'll be blurred by your own background. Right? So I think dialogue partners would do good if they continue to invest time and energy to understand the history of the region, where the value system come from, and the worldview of us and how we maintain ASEAN centrality and how we manage that peace, security, and stability here. Joel, you're right. When I was in the foreign ministry, I get this question a lot, right? What makes Singapore tick? How do you succeed? What you can do, we can't do. Despite the fact that we have the Singapore Cooperation Program. MIF has this Singapore Cooperation Program for the last 30 years where we share our experiences. I've never said that we are here to teach, but we're here to share our experiences in governance, in managing different issues. Many countries send their senior officials here. They understandably are impressed, but their conclusion is it's hard for us to do what you have done. Which I don't disagree, not because it cannot be done, but because the fundamentals are different, but because the basic structures are different. And we always tell our partners, you need to adapt what you see to your own country. Political system is different. Values are different. In Singapore, for example, we have the advantage of successive governments which has continuity, where policies can build from one generation of leader to another. We're able to build strong foundations right from the very beginning. We take very difficult decisions at the beginning, and we see the reap the benefits. For example, deciding on an open economy right from the very beginning, when others feel that that is a threat to their own territorial integrity, when you open our economy in the early 60s and 70s. So it's useful to understand backgrounds for them to know what's possible. Secondly, it's really the politics in the respective countries. Politics matter, domestic politics matter, and I think we are able to do so because of fundamental principles of our politics may differ significantly in many countries. So my sharing with all my counterparts has always been, let us know how we can share our experiences and support you in any way possible, but you have to make your own decision, how that will work for your own country. We are prepared to share more. We even send our officials to those respective countries to help build systems, to help ensure that the systems that they are prepared to set up can be set up and work, hopefully. But sometimes it doesn't, because the basic fundamentals are different compared to Singapore. So I do not think that we can necessarily say that all that is done in Singapore can be replicated. In fact, it's going to be difficult. But there's some elements of it that can be applied and actually benefit our counterparts. So our foreign policy has always been to go out, share, saying that, as mentioned earlier, the success of our neighbors is our success too. And we're prepared to work with them in areas that they're interested in doing so. Yeah.
Okay. Let me start with the gentleman in front. Yeah.
Thanks, Dr. Hong. Dr. Maliki, with the increase in accidental and...
Your name?
Oh, sorry, Kenneth Michael.
Kenneth.
I work at U.S. Indo-Pacific Command in Hawaii. We've seen an increase in accidental and deliberate damage to underwater sea cables. I was just curious, ASEAN's approach to what amounts to pretty costly and timely repairs. Are you guys focusing on underwater sea cables lately? Thank you.
Second question behind. Yeah. The lady at the back, I'll come to you later.
Thank you, Dr. Maliki, for your insightful presentation. I'm Colonel Victor Chen from the Singapore Air Force. You talked about the idea of issue-based coalitions, but what really comes to mind is how do small states actually ensure that these flexible coalitions, these parallel structures do not fragment global norms or dilute ASEAN centrality?
You had one?
Good morning, Dr. Maliki. I'm Colonel Noki from Thailand. And from your perspective, what does a truly proactive national policy look like in practical way, especially when security and diplomacy must move together? And what guiding principle would you recommend for defense policy makers so that proactive defense initiative reinforce rather than complicate over our overall foreign policy and national interest? Thank you.
Okay, Ms. Thailand. Then next one, Chris. You can give the fourth question and then Dr. Maliki can reply either collectively or 2 by 2.
Hi, Dr. Maliki. I'm Chris Wary from U.S. Indo-Pacific Command in Hawaii as well. Just a simple question on multilateral engagements with the small states. So obviously I come from a big state. And so many times it seems in the multilateral meetings with the small states, they ask for a whole lot from us, but don't really provide much. So how do I negotiate, how does the United States and other smaller, bigger countries, how do you negotiate that in the multilateral world without being, I don't want to ask for something that I really know they can't deliver because it's too aggressive, but there's got to be a middle ground somewhere. So if you could help me understand how what the small states should be offering, what they're capable of offering, so that maybe in our preparations for these engagements where we go in with a better opening position and understand where they're coming from more comprehensively as this continues to work its way forward. Thanks.
Okay, you have 4 questions.
Yep. Thank you. Kenneth's question on undersea cable. I'm not very familiar now with the current position, but that's always been the way because of the nature of energy or whatever that we need to transport. I think it will continue to stay for now and probably find ways to reduce the potential for such accidents happening. We are talking about even now the ASEAN power grid, for example. There will always be some of these challenges, and the deep undersea cable has always been an alternative. But I don't know enough to be able to comment on where we stand at this point in time.
Maybe I can add,
yeah.
On that particular point, I work with my ASEAN colleague quite extensively at different level. And at the ASEAN level, there is now a recognition on what we call critical undersea infrastructure, CUI. And different ASEAN member states have embarked on different initiatives to first study the challenges involved in undersea infrastructure. Is not only gas pipeline, oil pipeline, but cables connecting the internet facilities of different countries. So at this level, there have been some extensive discussion at what we call the think tank track 2 level. Yeah. But the reality of the industry is that all the companies that are doing this undersea cable laying and constructing oil pipeline or gas pipeline, you can count them with your 10 fingers. There are not many of them. And the people who can repair any damage, you can count them on one hand. And all these companies depend on 2 sources of technology and manpower. Mostly UK and India. Manpower come from the Indian technological staffing, which have always been responsible for helping to lay out all these lines and pipelines, cables and whatnot. So right now there is recognition of these challenges, and there is intensification of organizing more multinational companies led by USA and some European countries with Japan. Hopefully we can get something more out of this Otherwise, one classic example that we have in our ASEAN context is the Vietnamese cut off of internet. They suffer more than 7 months before simple reconnection can be installed. And they were shocked by the realization that there are very few people in the world who can fix any of these lines that have been broken. So, bottom line is that ASEAN countries are trying to get together. Yeah, but right now, due to the tremendous cost involved in getting the people, as well as having the equipment, it is slow moving. But there is political recognition at the highest level of ASEAN member states on the need to improve the capability to install such critical undersea infrastructure and to fix it if there is any problem. Thank you.
Thanks, Ambassador. The other question is from Victor on issue-based coalition and how does it not undermine ASEAN as well as other multilateral grouping. I think key is really, I go back to the three key factors I talk about: leadership, diplomacy, and trust. First and foremost, I think when we set up a grouping, issue-based grouping, for example, is to make sure that your key partners are aware and understand that these are your issues that you face and others may or may not. Oftentimes in regional grouping, they face similar issues, right? But if it doesn't, for example, then it's not to do it without the knowledge of your trusted partners or your trusted ASEAN members as an example. So key is really to be open, to continue to share your perspective and why you are initiating or be part of any coalition, any group that is issue-based. And the reason why I talk about issue-based, as mentioned by Bapak Mati also, is because increasingly these issues become unique to certain groups. And inevitably some groups of countries will face it first, and others will realize, or will it come to them a bit later on. So it all depends on where you are and how these issues surface. So I think for us to prevent it from undermining other multilateral coalition is to make sure that, one, you ensure that they are aware of it. Two, is also to bring these issues to those forums as part of the agenda setting, so that they are even aware that these are issues that are equally important. It may not be relevant to me as an individual country at that point in time, but it's on the agenda for me to be aware of what's happening. And that builds trust. It's not something that you discuss without my knowledge, and therefore it's eroding trust between you and me. Right? So I think it's important for us to ensure that the issue-based alliances is done in an open manner that does not undermine the trust, yet at the same time, parties must do their part in connecting with their own partners and ensuring that these things are well understood by their partners. The question on guiding policies, defense, I always am very cautious when somebody asks me what's my advice to a particular country, on policies, because our experience is unique to us, right? But from Singapore's defense perspective, policy, for example, you heard from our colleague from Ministry of Defense, always about deterrence and diplomacy. It's about first understanding your own security challenges. And increasingly, it is more than just military and border defense, as I mentioned earlier. So therefore, a defense policy must take into consideration all the emerging issues that can affect the security of your respective country. Singapore's unique position, being open to the world, having an open economy, opens itself to a lot of vulnerabilities. I talk about disinformation, I talk about the possible interference of foreign interference, This may be unique to Singapore because of the nature of our society. It may be different from for Thailand, for example. So defense policies must take into consideration security policy in a larger context rather than just defense alone. Because if you just look at defense alone, then you might not you might not appreciate the complexities of security challenges that are emerging the world over. COVID just shocked everyone. We all we see globalization as something that's super positive, everybody connected, interconnected world and everything. And COVID sets in and and we just got stuck. Globalization, what is it? It's all in Zoom for a while. No one can travel. There's so much challenges at that time. But now we realize how important health security is, how important these things are. So I think we have to look at it from the larger perspective and go beyond just deterrence. Understanding diplomacy is critical, but at the same time working with all the different sectors in your respective countries to articulate a more comprehensive response to security. Chris's point about how do we engage small states from a larger state's perspective, right? I've never been, I've never put myself in a larger state's perspective to know what we can do. But my personal take is this: you're absolutely right. Start where they are, right? Start where the small states are. But I mean, this is maybe a bit sensitive to say, but you must also recognize the context of those small countries, their political dynamics, because a lot of times when countries negotiate, there are two things that's happened. One is they study from their own domestic interests, and domestic interests actually differ across different countries. It depends on leaders, depends on the political systems in those countries. But what's important really is also to be able to facilitate. Really, you need to be able to give them what they need first. What do you get in return, right? You need to take a look. You need to take a longer term perspective on what you get in return. It may not be immediate. Do you get their votes in certain international voting platforms? Is that what you need? Or do you say that I'm investing in this relationship long term because you are a critical partner in my relationship with you? I think if we take a longer term perspective, you'll be able to get more returns, as it were, on your investment. However, as I mentioned earlier, the challenge has always been the continuity of governments that you engage with. And that's real, right? And Singapore is an anomaly, I think, where you have stable government after successive elections. And that's the reason why it's easier to work with a country like Singapore. In other countries, it's more challenging because the nature of their politics lead to potential change. And sudden change can swing, the pendulum can swing from one end to the other. Political ideology, that's totally different. So you might have been investing in the relationship and investing in the country. And suddenly the government change. And then you are faced with starting all over again. And so what happens to my investment earlier? So you need to really understand the dynamics of those respective partners or partner countries that you're working with in order for you to then make a decision, how much and what can I invest in that relationship. Because otherwise, you will realize that your investment is always not reaping anything because it changes again. It changes again. And it's one thing that is going to be very difficult to actually manage in relation to supporting and building relationship. So, and that's the reason why I highlighted earlier when I talk about trust. It's not as easy as just simply you need to build trust, but you need to also understand the dynamics of political systems in countries. And countries must also understand that if you don't reflect on the impact of your political system, your ability to engage partners outside will also be affected. Your ability to be able to engage different partners, because trust is built over time, and it cannot be something that you think will hold if it is not sustained over time with with people who share the same value system that you started investing in relationship first. So that's my take on how big countries will have to engage the small states, and what you hope to get in return is really dependent on what you start off first in engaging that respective country.
The trouble is that, Dr. Maliki, the kind of approach is not something familiar to big countries or a democratic system. Yeah, because the instinctive reaction of leaders from big countries, democratic system in particular, is that, we also have rules and what we call the principle of precedent. Previously, your boss agreed with me. Now I'm the new boss. You could also agree with me. And then when there is a bit of disagreement, you go back to basic power structure. I'm bigger than you. Sorry, I not have a trusting long-term relationship with you. Well, this is the way to start. So in RSIS, we have a guy called Joel Ng who believe in using multilateralism. Everything must be multilateral. So there is no tendency for any authoritarian or, one leader say this is the way to do it. All of us have to follow, because we crack our head and say, yeah, there is a problem. How to solve it? You're very powerful, very big, but the problem can only be resolved and the solution can only be sustained if we have the support of other countries, smaller nation state, who will probably follow the rules and use their small size to the advantage by stressing the need for decision making to be multilateral rather than unilateral or just bilateral. So this is the principle behind our devotion to multilateralism as a bulwark in our changing global environment. Yeah, President Donald Trump is powerful, but at the end, on some issues, United States of America has to work with the other people around the room, representing other smaller or medium-sized countries. So that is the motive underlying our current APPSMO's team called multilateralism as a bulwark in the changing global environment. Hopefully that also reinforce your takeaway from this APPSMO 2025. Are you done with all your responses?
Yes.
Okay. We still have time. Yeah. Further comments and questions? Yes. That gentleman there. Hey, where's the microphone? Hey, time not finished yet. You cannot switch off already. Go there. The back.
Hi, good morning. My name's Rusty. I'm from Canada. I'm representing the Department of Defense and Policy for the Indo-Pacific.
Better say the right thing. Your foreign minister was on TV this morning.
That's right.
The whole morning we were seeing her face. Yeah.
Well, this is great. We're glad that she's here, and we're actually very happy to have the Asia Pacific of Canada opening shop here in town. So hopefully that will bring a think tank to Singapore as well to discuss various issues. I have a quick question as related to the United Nations and ASEAN's role potentially. I think there's a more consensus with the world, the way it's changing, that the United Nations may not be as effective as it used to be. And I'm wondering, first, do you think there's enough consensus within the ASEAN nations to take a leadership role in pushing for some change to the United Nations permanent, to the Security Council? And if not now, when? Do you think that in the future there might be a leadership responsibility for ASEAN to find other countries in the world to put pressure on the the five, the permanent five, where we could get to some sort of change, either through a non-amendment process or some other lever within the United Nations to bring more people into, or more countries into the mix, so that we can get the United Nations back on track to fixing some of the world issues. Thank you.
Okay. Anything else along the same line? Yes. Over here, young man. Warren, first table here.
Thanks, Ambassador. Slightly different question. I mean, Dr. Maliki, you mentioned the importance of leadership in domestic politics. I thought it might be interesting, given your experience serving in government, in the foreign ministry, and defense, as well as your role as a mayor and MP, on reflections on the point that Marty made on the first day about how foreign policy is changing, given social media and growing nationalism and polarization in societies. How do you get foreign policy made? Because foreign policy often starts at home, right? Building that coalition around it. So how have things changed from your experience as a player, as a practitioner, shaping foreign policy given the changing context?
Okay, we stop here. Two very serious questions.
David,
Okay. Yeah, okay. Since you brought your hand.
Thank you, Dr. Maliki and Ambassador Ong. I'm David from Singapore Ministry of Defense. Officials today are often pulled in different directions. On the one hand, they outlast electoral cycles and changes in government and provide a strong degree of continuity and stability to the incumbent political leadership. On the other hand, they need to adapt and implement policies whenever a new government is formed, regardless of their own political inclinations. So we discussed a lot today about officials being good stewards and leaders of the multilateral system. Wanted to also hear your perspectives on the roles of officials vis-a-vis their own national governments. Thank you.
Thank you. All right.
Thank you.
Boss.
On Mr. Rusty, right? Yeah. A question on Canada, yeah, on UN and ASEAN. And this is a big question. It's on everybody's mind, right? What needs to change in the UN reform? I've been to Anga a couple of times. Every time I go there, it's always about UN reform. We don't have a crystal ball. I think nobody has a crystal ball in terms of what needs to change. But I think we recognize the importance of UN to maintain some kind of global order. Yeah, at the same time, it's very hard to say whose interests ought to be protected at what level. And the relationship between the UNSC and the UNGA, there are all these dynamics. I mean, even local politics, local residents, even in Singapore, they don't understand the distinction between UNSC and UNGA resolutions. And UNSC, the notion of veto powers of the 5 permanent members, that's been there for a long time, and the one thing that everybody says is, everybody agrees there has to be reform. But what kind of reform, whether ASEAN, whether the GCC, whether the EU, whether it is the African Union, every grouping, every region probably has its own take about what needs to be done. From ASEAN's perspective, at the end, I think it's about the global order and about ensuring the interests of states can be well represented and protected. It will take a long time for any reform to even start to be discussed, I would imagine, simply because the different interests that will continue to be brought onto the table. But I think what's important is, while we recognize that those reforms are important, we should start discussing and talking about what is the desired outcome. And one desired outcome is really we want to maintain law and order, we want to maintain rules-based international order, and that cannot be compromised. Secondly is really the recognition that things will evolve faster than it ever did before. And the recognition that this evolution will have an impact on the way the reform takes place, and the adaptability and ability for key institutions like UN to be able to respond to those changes quick enough. And that must be one of the factors in the discussions on reform. So I don't think whether ASEAN or any other region will have its own take specifically on what needs to be done. But I think what everyone must start focusing on is the kind of UN that we want is one that is adaptable, responsive. Global crisis set in, what do you do? Right, today I spoke, and many have spoken about the limitations because of the veto powers. And crisis can't move. You can't resolve crisis simply because of that. And I think we need to start looking at some of these issues also. Warren, thanks for the question on my experience and what I've seen so far. When I started out 2001, the notion of foreign policy begins at home hasn't been crystallized. It's only quite recently that we started crystallizing this idea of foreign policy beginning at home and the importance of engaging the local residents on foreign policy. If you talk about 20 years ago, Singaporeans are oblivious about foreign policy. They just assume that Singapore will survive. They just assume that we have good relations with different countries and we're able to do so. But the various crises in the world today, over the last maybe 5-10 years or so, I think starting with the global financial crisis and how we're all impacted by it, makes Singaporeans realize how important foreign policy is. And I think that the recent conflict, the Ukraine war, as well as Gaza, brought to the forefront how important articulation of foreign policy, beginning at home, and understanding that your foreign policy must take into consideration your own domestic interests. Domestic interest means Singapore's interests, where we are. Everybody would have known and heard about the calls by many Singaporeans across all sectors, across all communities, about why can't Singapore recognize the state of Palestine, as many other countries are doing so. But there are many considerations in making that decision. And you see how the government has articulated incrementally the position. And it's always about the national interests. And a lot of times, the policy has always been to be able to engage the community well enough to make them understand. I was in politics for 25 years. Engagement was key to our work as politicians. But over the last 10 years, I've started seeing the importance of engagement on very complex issues like foreign policy. And there's growing interest. There's growing interest in the Singapore population to know more about foreign policy. They are interested in knowing why and how we make decisions. And I think MFA, for example, has gone out more extensively, engaging schools, engaging communities to talk about these challenges. Sometimes it's the challenge in itself is to be able to say, how open can I get to tell you why we discuss, why we decide on certain things. And that's in itself is a challenge, because behind closed doors, we can say certain things. In the public, we can say certain things, right? So that the shift really is first the recognition that you must start engaging your population. And I think it's easier for Singapore because we are small. I can't imagine big countries talking about foreign policy, to their respective constituents, because there are many other domestic considerations that are far more important. At the same time, I also think that you also see the one thing that Singapore has done is to recognize that the population has also shifted. You see a population that's a lot more aware, albeit I would say be careful about where they get awareness from in terms of the information that they get. But at least that was the interest, right? And shifts in value system. The younger generation we see a shift in the way they view things compared to the earlier generation. And so government has to respond accordingly. And I've seen that shift. In 20 years, I've seen how we've shifted our engagement in recognizing more diversity, more diverse viewpoints, and welcoming more stakeholders into that discussion. We also see a more vibrant non-government sector emerging. The groups that are more willing to engage government, and government is willing to engage the groups. But I think at the end of the day, what's important is the ability for all of us to recognize what's in Singapore interests. And that's something that's very, very core to all those discussions. So I've seen shifts. I think some of our partners would also possibly see shifts, despite the fact I say there's continuity in government. There is a shift in the way we think and the way we articulate our position internationally. And that's what adaptability is all about. I talk about leadership and adaptability too, and forward-looking, understand what the challenges are, and be ready to bring your population to those decision points that you are making. David, you're absolutely right. You know, there is a distinction between civil servants, government officials, and the leadership. The civil servants implement the policy of the government, whoever the government may be, whatever the government may be. And I think that's the role of civil servants, to stay above their own political inclination, for that matter. And I think it's important for civil servants to continue to do so, and recognize the role of political leadership and their role in implementing policies articulated by the political leadership. And that's what democracy is. And Singapore's system is the public, the voters vote a political leadership, and they will have to accept those policies, and they vote based on policies articulated by those leaders in bringing them to the next 5 years of the political term. And I am very, very assured that our civil servants are individuals of high character and integrity who understands specifically their roles. I've seen and I know civil servants with different political inclinations, but they are there and they perform their role effectively. And I think that's important for officials to understand that your role is to implement the policy of the government of the day. But having said that, one must also be conscious of one's position and one's own value system. Once one feels conflicted, then you have to make a decision if you can carry out that policy or not. If you can't, then you have to make that decision. Because otherwise, you will always face that challenge. Am I doing something that's against my principle? I disagree and I don't think I can deliver this. Then you have to make that decision. It's very hard for you to do your work if you disagree totally. There will be elements of it you may not agree, right? Elements of it that you may say, well, you can do it differently, but you can articulate that. I think me, in having been in government for many years, I've always told my officials that we don't have we don't know everything, right? And therefore, it's incumbent upon officials to also articulate their viewpoints, even if they disagree with the ministers, right? Even if they disagree with the ministers, they can articulate, and that's the value of having officials who are able to have good conversations on policy making, in the process of policy making. At the end of the day, the decision still is at the minister's level because the leaders are the ones who are accountable for those decisions. But at least you've gone through that process of articulating your viewpoints and manage disagreements to a level that you are comfortable with, right? So we don't have the autonomy of all decisions, but I think the process is clear. And in my work previously in government, I've always created an opportunity for all my officials to disagree with me wherever they say, wherever they think they can disagree, and we can discuss. We can discuss and we come to a decision. And when we come to a decision, let's then stick to that decision. And that's the same way how Singapore government works. In cabinet, there will always be disagreements, but at the end of the day, we go out with a collective position. And once we go out with a collective position, that's the position we take. We will not say that, actually I disagree inside, right? Because that's not good for Singapore, right? And there will be times where we will probably have to say, yes, I disagree, but the larger scheme of things, the overall outcome is something I don't disagree, and I'm prepared to do so. Right? So I think that's how I would encourage officials to kind of like manage their own position and perform their role as best as they can. Thanks.
You are supposed to write a PhD thesis for us, you know. Now that he has retired from politics, yeah. So, okay, whoever is in charge of this project, remember what Dr. Maliki said today, yeah, yeah. So, okay, I think we have just 1 or 2 more minutes left. Anybody else want to comment? Okay, yes, one quickly. Where's the microphone? Yeah. Short and sharp, yeah.
Hi, Dr. Maliki. I'm Nelson from the UK Royal Navy. Could you tell us what poses the greatest threat to Singapore and other small states who rely on multilateralism and the rules-based international system?
Okay, got it, sir?
Yeah, I think for Singapore particularly, it's because of the nature of our openness. We are a very open economy. Because we are open, we subject ourselves to, one, lots of economic potential, yet at the same time, the challenges, our economy has always been based on an open economy attracting investments to Singapore to grow the economy. And to do that, the greatest challenge has always been to make sure that Singapore is safe, secure for our investors, for our people. If you're not secure, you're not safe, investors are not going to come. If you're not safe and secure, you cannot be a financial hub. You cannot be an economic hub. We don't have any natural resources. We base our economy totally on what we've built over the years, political trust, diplomatic trust that we have built over the years. And that's the greatest challenge, to maintain that. Multilateralism is important because we can't do it alone. We do it because we are successful because we have partners, and we've been engaging partners all these years. Multilateralism allows us to connect with many different players and ensuring that the rules-based order remains upheld. So that when countries invest in Singapore, when countries partner Singapore, set up their hubs in Singapore, something happens. Singapore has its rules that are based on international law too, to be able to protect their interests. And it's a challenge because we are small, right? Some say we punch above our weight, but that's something so important to us, right? Our diplomatic corps is everywhere out there. We establish new relationship as we move. We see different regions as critical for us to continue to be friends to everyone. So if you ask me what is our major challenge, it's always been to maintain that stability, that security that we have. And we cannot do it alone. And when I talk about stability and security, it's about the stability and security of the region, ASEAN for that matter. If ASEAN is not safe and secure and not stable, Singapore as a little red dot will easily be forgotten, because the region is not safe and no one is going to come to the region, and Singapore will face the greatest challenge ever, right? So I think this is our experience, and I think many small countries will probably face some elements of that challenge similarly, because the dependency on the other parts of the world is so real, right? And that dependency in itself creates a challenge, right? You saw what happens during COVID. Food security, for example, right? Singapore imports 90% of our food needs. can just imagine if something happens, if an international crisis happens again, and every country becomes inward-looking and stops exporting, what happens to us, right? So diversification now becomes our strategy, and building trust is critical. And so even during COVID, or when supplies are disrupted, we still manage to ensure supplies and that confidence remain high amongst our citizens that we can manage that crisis. So I think it's important to understand the viewpoint of small states being dependent, and we acknowledge that dependency, yet at the same time small states must do their part to ensure that dependency does not lead to their own destruction if they don't maintain. And to maintain that dependency well, I go back to the three key elements: good leadership, effective diplomacy, and the ability to build trust with your counterparts from different countries. Thanks.
Well, I think that is a good line to bring home and think about it. I wanted to remind us of what Professor Peter Frankopan said. Actually, he didn't say very much, right? He just showed us all the slides. Yeah, yeah, that's a good way to earn a living, man. Just, yeah. But in that collection of slides, he had one part where he talks about the challenges to our respective countries. Yeah, storms, germs, digitalization, and drones. So as we wrap up today's discussion, when you go back to your respective homes in your respective countries, people ask you, what do you take away from here? Oh, we are threatened by storms, by germs, by digits, and by drones. Don't have to say it come from Peter Frankopan, just say, I take away from the 1 week in Singapore, these 4 words, storms, germs, digit, and drones. And how do we deal with this kind of problem, these kind of challenges or threat to our respective countries and population? We go multilateral. Yeah. So on that note, Dr. Maliki Osman, thank you very much. Yeah. I was supposed to tell you all how much honor he got from his university days, his time in government, his time in working for the community. But I think all this will come out in a published form, so you all can look at it. Only to say that, you know, in the interest of time just now, I wanted to let him finish his lecture and take questions from all of you. So thank you very much, sir, for your time and your sharing today.